I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show.
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
Game 4 of the 2024 Stanley Cup Final on Saturday. Siege, you have been on this series from the jump. It is not going the Oilers' way. You were in the building for Game 3. I watched from my couch. It was, wow. It's just, this Oilers team looks completely overmatched, at least from what I've seen, but I would love to know your analysis on what you've seen so far and why the Oilers are down deep in a 3-0 hole.
Well, first of all, I'll say that the atmosphere in Edmonton was just unreal all day long, frankly, before Game 3. I mean, you know, the way I put it in my story, 18 long winters here have passed since they last had a chance to watch a Stanley Cup final game where the Oilers were playing in Edmonton. The fans showed up. It could be the loudest building in the league, honestly. I mean, Vegas is a pretty loud building. I heard Vancouver, obviously it didn't get out there, was pretty loud in the two rounds they played this year. But really, really great environment. And unfortunately, the Oilers squandered an opportunity. I mean, it might end up being kind of the theme of the series, but you know, it's a 3-0 series lead for Florida, but it's not like Florida's dominated 3 whole games. I mean, certainly Game 1, Bobrovsky, I think, you know, had a big hand in stealing the Panthers a game. The Panthers were the much better team in Game 2. No critiques there. But Game 3, I mean, Edmonton had chances. They had more power plays that they didn't convert on. They were still in a great spot, 1-1, 8 minutes into the second period, and doing well and generating and starting to lean on Florida. And then they make a series of mistakes that all end up in their net, whether it's Stuart Skinner bobbling that puck and not getting fully set back into position for the second goal. The third goal, Darnell Nurse, commits a turnover. Fourth one, Barkov gets in alone on your goalie. That all happens in a 7-minute stretch. I mean, in games where the margins are this small, you can't give up those sort of things. And so it's a weird series because I can't be that critical of Edmonton, but at the same time, I mean, tip your cap to the Panthers. It was 1 year ago last night. They were in Vegas watching the Golden Knights celebrate at T-Mobile Arena on the wrong side of the handshake line. And, you know, they've been tested over the 12 months and 1 day since. And it just seems like they've had an answer for each of those tests. And now they've got 4 chances to close this series out. And, pretty surreal. We're sitting here perhaps on the cusp of saying the Florida Panthers could be Stanley Cup champions because, you know, for a lot of their history as an organization, they felt like they were nowhere close to being championship caliber, and they've been just awesome this year.
Absolutely. But to your point about the fact that the Oilers still have gotten their chances, I mean, you look at their best players in this series. I think Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, Evan Bouchard combined 4 points between those 3 players. No goals between those 3 players. And if you add Zach Hyman to that as well, no goals between those 4. Like, there's something missing from those top line guys.
Yeah, but to my eyes, they've had the chances. You know, Connor McDavid's had a couple, at least partial breakaways in the series. You know, Leon Draisaitl was set up at his one-timer spot on the power play in the first period of Game 3. I mean, it's a place when he gets a clean look that he's going to score, 7, 8 times out of 10. And in that one, you know, I did actually ask him about after the game. He said he could have got the puck up a little bit more, but, you know, Bobrovsky's been so good. And so, you know, those players are going to wear it, rightfully so. I mean, they're paid to produce. And frankly, look at their point totals. I mean, these guys, even in the years they don't win in the playoffs, are getting 30 points. They're over 30 points again this playoffs. I mean, the only reason the Edmonton Oilers are in a position to play a game on June 15th is because those players have been awesome. But in this series, they haven't been difference makers. They haven't been able to tilt the scales in Edmonton's favor just yet. And you know, that's the painful thing about Game 3. I would say if we had this conversation on our normal time on Thursday morning before the game Thursday night, I would have said the issue that Edmonton's having is that they have nothing beyond those players. But look who scored the goals in Game 3. It was all these guys scoring their second of the playoffs. You know, players that haven't, either aren't counted on to produce or haven't produced in the playoffs. You know, Warren Fogle, Ryan McLeod, Broberg gets a goal too. You know, it's just it's puzzling, I guess, or it must be frustrating behind the scenes for the Oilers that they do get a little bit of offense from down the lineup that hasn't been there through the playoffs. And yet, you know, it's yet another game. Their power play doesn't click. McDavid can't quite break through. I mean, even McLeod had a glorious chance just after making it 4-3. McDavid sets him up in the slot with a look that he must have been dreaming about that one last night. It was so good, and unfortunately, it turned into a bit of a nightmare because he couldn't lift the puck over Bob.
What did you think of the McDavid scrum after game 3? Just watching it on TV and seeing all of those reporters around him. Of course, he has to be in that spotlight. But what do you think of how he's handling where his team is at so far?
I've actually really liked his demeanor in the series in the microphones, and let's face it, I don't think it's his favorite part of the job. I mean, it wouldn't be alone among NHL players to say that it's a bit laborious at times to have to get at the podium, get behind the mic. But I thought even the way he spoke after game 2, they brought him out here again in Edmonton when the series shifted north. Like I feel like he's done that part of the job as well as you could hope. Given the normal caveat. He doesn't have the Matthew Tkachuk goofy charm, or like he doesn't have what a lot of some players are just more naturally inclined or don't mind being in that media spotlight. But I don't have any critiques of Connor. I will say the game ended last night and it was a unusually long amount of time before we got to speak to any of the players, including Connor McDavid. And I think that's a reflection of the moment, right? I mean, you just lost this game. I can only imagine everyone had to take a little bit of time to compose themselves. But once they came out, I couldn't get anywhere near Connor McDavid. You might have noticed on the Short Kings podcast that your boy CJ isn't the tallest guy in the media scrum. So I pivoted and went to the left and went to Leon Draisaitl and was able to ask him some questions because his scrum was smaller. And even Leon, who at times can be, he can bring his game face into the media scrum off the ice at times. I thought last night, you can imagine the tone and the subject matter of the questions weren't exactly things that he'd want to talk about, but he hit it head on. He said that they shot themselves in the foot in the game. He didn't sugarcoat anything. I think these guys realize that they're up against it. And the job today now, I'm back here at the rink kind of first thing next morning is they got to find a way to wipe that clean and just try to win the game Saturday. I mean, the funny thing about the cliches in sports is they're true. I mean, if Edmonton wins Saturday, it looks different. I'm sure Florida's still feeling good. They're going home to their fans. They got a chance to win it. But if they don't win it there, then all of a sudden the pressure goes up. I mean, that's all you can do when you've dug the hole the Oilers have. And, Chris Knobloch mentioned they won 16 games and wrote 1 point this year, had a couple of 8-game winning streaks. I mean, I'm certainly not predicting Edmonton comes back in the series, but the chances of them doing it are probably a little higher than the historical stats of teams that have done it, say 5%.
I think like 1942 is the last time we've seen a team come back from a 3-0 deficit in the Stanley Cup final.
That's correct. Yeah. And I don't know how many teams have had the chance since, but it's a lot. And, the crazy thing is it's more unlikely that we could get a sweep of the series. I mean, it's been since 1998 that there's been a sweep in the Stanley Cup final. I think I've only ever in my career covered one sweep, and I've covered a lot of playoff series over the years. I mean, the fact of the matter, a sweep at any stage of the playoffs is fairly unusual in this day and age, and certainly in the final. I mean, I was still in high school when it last happened, and here I am with gray hair sitting in the press room.
The gray hair still looks good, though. I will say this: 98.
Thanks,
you're right. 98 is the last time we've seen a sweep in the Stanley Cup final. If the Dallas Mavericks lose tonight in Game 4 of the NBA Finals and Florida wins on Saturday, it'll be the first time since 1995 that the NBA and the Stanley Cup Finals both end in sweeps. Also, I believe the 98
Wait a
finals...
minute.
Yes.
Wait a minute. So Dallas is up in the NBA final?
No, did I say that wrong? If Mavericks lose, they're down 3-0. Sorry. Dallas is down 3-0 against Boston.
You didn't say anything wrong. I just haven't watched 1 minute of the NBA Finals, and I have no idea who's leading, what's going on. I thought Boston was the team to beat.
Oh, Boston definitely. I mean, they have been cooking on the Dallas Mavericks to this point in this series. I'll tell you this: Game 3 of that series, that's the first anything of that series I've watched. You can tell I've been away for a couple of days, so I'm just getting
jet setting Julian is your new nickname.
Oh man, I'm just trying to make sure. Just being back on Mountain Time for me now is just a little bit nuts. But anyway, first time. If it gets to that point, it'll be the first time since '95. The NBA and the Stanley Cup Finals end in sweeps. If it gets to that point, and it's my understanding, I think the '98 series, that was like the 4th year in a row the Stanley Cup Finals ended in sweeps. I don't know how people watched in the '90s Stanley Cup Finals ending in consecutive sweeps. That's insane to me.
Yeah, it was a different league. I mean, I remember those series, and there definitely was less sort of parity back then, right? I mean, that was the pre-cap world. You had teams like Colorado and Detroit. Detroit was swept in 95, 96. Yeah, uh, Avalanche swept the Panthers, right?
Yes, they did.
97 and 98 were both Detroit sweeps. But the
Mhm.
Red Wings were one of the top spending teams of that era. If you look at some of those teams, they had like 10 Hall of Famers on them. I mean, it was a different league. Whereas now, obviously so many great players in this series, pretty star-studded series, really, Edmonton, Florida. But there's also you see in this, like in game 3, Corey Perry comes back in the lineup and goes right onto the second line. I mean, you don't usually see a guy healthy scratch one game and then put back on the second line. I mean, just I don't think that you can have the depth. I think Florida is probably the deeper team. They're the healthier team right now too, which I think it might get lost in some of the analysis. Like I think it's easy to fall into narratives that some of them are true. I mean, I think the Panthers are probably better for the experience of getting close last year and know how to handle themselves on this stage. But Paul Maurice did say just before the series started, he's like, last year we had 13 reasonably healthy skaters when we got to the final. Like we were basically just out of gas. And I feel a little bit like that might be where Edmonton's at. Again, not an excuse. They might have been the second best team in the series, even everybody healthy, but they're not everybody healthy, right? I mean, Darnell Nurse played 4 shifts in game 2 after, the early stages of the first period. Evander Kane was clearly, ailing. He comes out game 3. Like it just feels like they're on fumes, the Oilers, and Chris Knobloch's doing what he can to squeeze what he can out of them. He's hoping for big moments from his big players, but you know, Florida, even Barkov. I mean, look, they almost had a self-imposed issue with their own health. They almost didn't get here on time. Certainly weren't maybe in the best spot with their travel to be ready for that game, and still didn't matter. Barkov takes the hit from Draisaitl, misses half of the third period. He was probably the best player on the ice for me last night.
Oh
I'll
my
tell you,
god.
I got a Conn Smythe trophy vote, and I'm really conflicted between Bobrovsky and Barkov. At this point, like I have not, I would tell, probably wouldn't tell you because I'm worried about, I don't want to skew the ultimate results, but I have not made up my mind between those two because there's a really strong case on both ends for either of them to win the Conn Smythe.
When I was watching Game 3 yesterday, one of my good buddies from back home is here with me visiting, and he doesn't watch hockey at all. So for the entire game, I was just pointing out players and saying, "This is why this guy's good. This is why this guy's good." And Barkov makes that incredible play where he breaks up the 4-on-4 in the offensive zone for Edmonton, keeps the puck in the Florida offensive zone, leads to the pass to Gustav Forsling, and we know the Sam Hart Reinhart goal after that. Just, I know it's a secondary assist for Barkov, but that is such an incredible play by a guy who is the best defensive forward in the game right now, just won the Selke, and that might sum up Barkov's career better than any other play he's ever had. Like, that was just amazing to watch. And then on top of that, he gets himself a goal later on in the game. That was an incredible game by one of the game's best players.
Right. And we spent 2 days wondering if he was going to play, right? It wasn't fully clear. The signs were encouraging because he did manage to practice between games 2 and 3. So, you would assume if a guy's on the ice practicing, he's going to find a way to get on the ice to play. But it was at least a question mark. He missed the last half of the third period of game 2. Paul Maurice was notably very, even after a Panthers win that night to go up 2-0, he was very, what's the right word? You could tell he was not in the best mood because his best player had been taken off the ice. And, I don't know how you feel. You have to remember, Conn Smythe award is for the playoff MVP. So the previous rounds matter. Barkov's our leading scorer. He's him and Evan Rodriguez both are the Panthers' leading point producers in the final itself. But Bobrovsky stole game 1. He's up against yet another high-powered team, and he's got, I think, a .953 save percentage in the final.
Yes.
I mean, the truth is, you don't lift the cup if you don't have multiple choices. Like Jonathan Marchessault won last year's Conn Smythe Trophy, but Jack Eichel, if he had won it, I don't think anybody could say that was the wrong decision. Even Aiden Hill had a pretty magical playoff run in the Golden Knights crease. So, I guess eventually you just look at everything, you consider it. I'm going to, ask a few people that are watching the series that I trust, that are in positions of power, to just bounce some ideas off them. But, you probably can't make a bad choice, but at the same time, you want to make the right choice. I mean, it's a historically significant award. Look, we've talked about this before, and I wrote a column about it early in the series. Like, Bobrovsky's probably going to the Hall of Fame with a cup win, but if he gets a cup win at a Conn Smythe, I don't even think, I think it's as automatic could be. I mean, you might be talking first ballot at that point. I mean, especially because we don't know what's yet to come in his career, and there's no reason to predict, even though he's getting up within that 30 age range, mid 30s. No reason to predict for me that he's going to fall off either anytime soon.
Am I allowed to make my opinion known for who should win playoff MVP, or are you afraid that's going to skew your opinion?
No, I appreciate you asking, but dude, I want your opinions all the time. Let it fly.
I think Sergei Bobrovsky should be the pick. And look, you mentioned it. It's for the entirety of the playoffs. You can go through almost every round and point out a significant performance from Sergei Bobrovsky. Dude has the save of the playoffs. Let's not forget about that incredible save he made in round one. Literally just you see it on the screen if you're watching here. He made an incredible save on Matt Dumba in round one. Also, barring his numbers falling off a cliff in game 4 or however long this series lasts, Sergei Bobrovsky will more than likely end this series with one of the 10 best save percentages ever recorded in a Stanley Cup final. That 953 you mentioned is right now tied for the 7th best save percentage ever recorded in a Stanley Cup final. I don't think you have to overthink this that much. I think Barkov's been incredible for the Florida Panthers. I just raved about him in game 3, but Sergei Bobrovsky has been the guy throughout this postseason for the Florida Panthers. I think it's an easy pick for me if I had to make the choice.
I wish I felt it the same way. I mean, it's not that I'm against them. I just said Barkov's their number one center, and look how they've shut down Zibanejad, Pasternak, now McDavid, Draisaitl. I mean, and that's a lot of that goes to him. I mean, Kucherov in the first round, even Tampa wasn't able to get going the way they would normally do it. I mean, when you're playing first line center mitts, I mean, no one will. I don't know if there's any real Gustav Forsling push, but I think there's honestly a case he made for him with the minutes he's logged and his role in helping shut things down defensively alongside Barkov. Barkov, I think, leads the team in points. I didn't check after last night's game, but I'm pretty sure, given the game he had, it's a tough one. I mean, as I say, like you're not winning the cup without having all three of those guys. Like that's where it gets difficult. And some years I voted on the Conn Smythe, it's been pretty clear, and you see almost like unanimous type winners. I actually look back on last year. There was a lot of people that voted Jack Eichel, like Eichel, Marchessault. Maybe wasn't a full toss-up, but it was pretty close. Mm-hmm. Like there was definitely, I can't remember the exact number, 5 or 6 of the voters at least had Eichel first. I think this year could be like, who knows? Maybe there'll be a tie. I don't know what they do in that case, because it goes on a sliding point scale. But maybe everyone will have them either 1 or 2, and it'll be the exact same number, and they'll be co-winners or something. That'd be kind of cool.
Have we? I mean, I didn't get a chance to look, but off the top of your head, have we ever had co-winners for playoff MVP?
No, I think the closest we came in the first Penguins Cup 2016, I'm pretty sure Crosby and Kessel were 1 point difference in the final voting tallies, something like that. I know it was razor thin between them, but to my knowledge, maybe in the 70s or something there was, but not since I've been around has there been any co-winners. And we just so you know, or anyone who might be wondering about process, literally we just vote 1, 2, 3. Those of us selected to have a vote have to put it in by the 10-minute mark of the third period of any clinching game. So even if it is 8-0 Oilers on Saturday night, I would, by the 10-minute mark of the third period, have to, just for posterity's sake, place a vote. If it was 8-0, I think we'd be pretty clear. Probably not going to see the trophy handed out that night, but and so you can't choose to have co-winners. It would only be a scenario where the votes aligned in a certain way, and I don't know if there's a tiebreaker. But there's 18 voters, so I'm just saying, let's just say for fun, 9 of them have Barkov 1 and Bobrovsky 2, and none of them have Bobrovsky 1 and Barkov 2. I mean, there's no tie to break, right? It would just be, they share it, I think.
By the way, that was literally the next question I was going to ask. So great on you for the telepathy there, thinking of what I was going to ask you. That's awesome.
We haven't been together barely in 2 weeks, but we still got the mojo.
Still got it. If you're the Edmonton Oilers, you're back against the wall. How do you go about game 4? What's the key for you to get a win over Florida?
It's funny for me. It would be really focusing on the details defensively. Like I feel as though a team like that is going to score goals. I realize it hasn't happened in the series, and that would be your counterpoint. But I think it's more about not handing gifts to the Panthers, because if you can just stay in a close game, I just think Connor McDavid's going to score a goal like he did against Dallas in the final game of the Western Conference Final, or Draisaitl's going to get one more one-timer look on a power play and he's going to make good on it instead of missing the way he did in Game 3. I think it's more about not giving anything easy to Florida. I'd like to see them play a little more physically. I mean, maybe they just don't have it in them. But I think you want to send a message with your words, with your actions, and with your details that this is not over, that you want to let Florida know it's going to be hard, because nothing is easy. Like, to call it easy would be trivializing the entire experience of the playoffs, but it has been a little too easy, I would say, for the Panthers. I mean, it must feel inevitable in their dressing room, right? I mean, they have not faced a Game 7 in the playoffs. They've just, again, I'm not going to say cruised, because like, it's a battle out there. Don't get me wrong. And they've had to, really close it out with some strong third periods in some of these games. But, you didn't win last year, and then you keep telling yourself you're going to win this year. And the belief it must just built and built and built. And I mean, I can't even imagine how it would feel to be up 3-0 in a series. Like, there's no way your mind isn't going there a little bit. Like, if your family wasn't already here, your family's flying in now to Edmonton, because, the team that has a chance to win always has their families in the building. You can start looking ahead to summer vacation, because it's been a grind. You're 102 games or 103 games into the season. Part of it, someone once told me, won a cup, a player, when you win, it's like partly just relief. Like thank God that is finally over, because it was so damn hard. Obviously, there's a lot of other emotions that go into it too, but if I'm the Edmonton, I have to try to introduce any little bit of doubt any way I can. I think you can only do so much in Game 4, because even if you win, Florida's going home. That's a comfortable situation. They got 2 off days to make sure their plane gets there a little sooner than it did coming up here, and you got lots of time to just sort of get ready for that game. But you got to start planting those seeds. And look, I mean, they got the crowd behind them. They have probably still the best. They do. They have the best individually skilled players in the series, but they can't give the gifts to Florida the way they did. I mean, I think that's really what killed them in Game 3 in particular, but also Game 1. I mean, they didn't break through on Bob and made some mistakes, and they lose a close one.
Considering the travel schedule between Edmonton and Florida, obviously reporters don't root for outcomes, they don't root for teams. But if the Florida Panthers don't win Game 4 and you have to fly back to Florida, what's the first thing going through your mind?
Oh, I'll be chill.
You'll be chill?
I'm fresh here. Yeah, I'm fresh here. And I've done this for a long time. There've been times in my life where I really wanted a series to end, not because I cared about which team was about to win or lose, but things are maybe going on in my life. But I signed up for 7 games in this thing, even though it doesn't look like it's going to happen right now. I'm not mentally like thinking, oh, by Monday morning I could be cutting my grass or, doing any chores at home. So I will be chill. I think some of my colleagues, especially those that have been covering the Oilers, they've just had a lot more travel throughout the playoffs. They might be ready for it to be done if you gave them a truth pill and had the camera turned off. But I can say, hand on my heart, Julian, that I'm good with whatever result is. On Sunday, I've got a flight that brings me back to Toronto, and I got a flight that takes me to Florida, and I'll go on whichever one the circumstances demand.
How does it work for canceling some of those flights for the people who wouldn't know? Like, you just I don't know how best to explain that.
Look, there's no good way to do it, because if you haven't booked your flight yet, let's just say you're waiting to see what it is. I mean, the cost is going to be insane at this point, I would assume.
Yeah.
I haven't got on the websites and looked, but you can't book it that last minute. So I think the best way to do it is book the flights as early as you can and book refundable fares, which cost a little bit more to begin with, but they end up actually making more sense than just waiting till last minute and risking maybe the flight path you need isn't available or what have you. But it's honestly, this job is part lots of things, but you're part travel agent in all seriousness when you get in these playoff series. And it's a little trickier too when you don't live in one of the cities, because you have 3 options, right? I mean, if I'm a Edmonton-based writer covering it, I mean, it's just like, well, I either get on the plane or I just stay at home. There's sort of less dynamics. And even when they fly home, they don't have to figure out the hotels and everything. But logistics are a big part of the job. And honestly, I'm a weirdo. I have always loved traveling, and I've always loved planning trips and stuff. I don't know if that's something that can be passed on, but my mom was big into that sort of stuff. And I don't know if somehow that went from generation to generation, or maybe I just learned from her or whatever it is. But I actually really like the planning part. I think it stresses some people out, and some people really hate it. And it's almost like doing your taxes or something. They like avoid it and they leave it to the last minute. I get like the playoff dates as soon as I can. If you had saw my Air Canada account like before this series was set, I had flights going here, there, and everywhere. I had like,
Oh
you know,
my God.
that I had the possibilities for like a Dallas Rangers series that never happened, right? Or like every permutation I was prepared for, and then you know, as the teams get eliminated, you just go on a canceling spree. But my credit card statement is a mess right now.
Air CJ coming to a Canadian airport near you, 2025.
You know what? Do you know what's funny? I'll mention too. I won't dox anyone here, but I have
Oh.
had the most interest. But I have had the most interesting seatmates on my flights lately. Like
I want to
people
know.
who have like, I no, because I don't have their permission, and like I don't,
Okay.
you know, they're probably like, what? I sit with a guy on a plane, and then he goes and tells all my stories. But like people with like really fascinating jobs and like who've had powerful positions, no powerful people, like had great stories. I'm normally the kind of guy, like if I get on the plane, I usually don't want to talk to anyone. Like I like to just like shut it down. But I have had multiple like 3 or 4 hour flights in the last week where I've literally talked to a stranger the whole time. Like it's so I'm on a good run of like crazy seatmates. So maybe I'll let the universe decide who my next great seatmate's going to be and whether I'm flying to Toronto or back to down to Florida.
Okay, Siege. There have been some rumblings, player movement, potential. Some guys could be traded. Some guys could not be traded. Who knows? I'm just going to mention a name, and you're going to tell me everything you know about their situation. How's that sound?
I like it. Yeah, I mean, it's like a volcano about to erupt now, right? You can start to feel the tremors a little bit. There's a little more noise out there. You're seeing a player like Jalen Chatfield sign an extension in Carolina, could have been a free agent. I mean, you just get the feeling and the sense and the understanding that we're going to have the news explosion around the league here in the next couple of weeks.
I can't wait. Let's start with Patrick Laine. What's the latest with him?
Patrick Laine is still in the NHLPA program, player assistance program. And so, you know, I don't know how that part of his situation will resolve itself. I don't know, you know, obviously that's a very private thing for a player. And I really don't have any information at all in terms of when he may be in a position to be removed from the program and ultimately resume his playing career. But when he does resume his playing career, there's an understanding between him and the Blue Jackets that they're going to try to find him a new home, somewhere else to play. I mean, it hasn't been a successful time there for him. You know, he's only got 2 years left on his contract. It's a pretty big number, 8.7 million. But you know, if you look over the course of his career, a healthy, happy, you know, free flowing Patrick Laine has scored 40 goals in the league before and has been a big threat. And so, you know, obviously for his sake personally, we hope he's getting back towards happy and healthy and in a position where he can do what he loves to do. And when he does, sounds like he'll be doing it somewhere else. I don't get the sense it's necessarily anything imminent in his case because, you know, well, we still are in June and he's still in that player assistance program. But, you know, it sounds as though he's probably played his last game in Columbus unless for some reason or another not able to trade him.
I wonder about that salary, and I understand we're jumping ahead with that situation when I mentioned this part because you're right, he's still in the program. But I wonder if a move for Patrick Laine is going to have to be one of those big salary for big salary type of trades.
Well, I think he could be. I mean, Columbus is also at a spot though where he's only got 2 years on the deal, and so I would say that there's a chance to just retain even maybe up to 50%. I mean, obviously that the devil will be in the details of making that trade, but you know, because it's only 2 years, I think it is a tradable contract ultimately. You know, but you know, it is not. I think it's safe for us to assume that there's going to either be salary coming back or salary retained. Like how that all gets managed will be an important dynamic of that trade. But with 2 years and that team, obviously they're trying to get towards respectability. They're trying to get back to being a playoff team as soon as they can. But I think that 2 year window, they can have some dead money on the books and live with it. Especially in this case where they're you know, where they're doing right by the player and trying to get him a fresh start and obviously turning things over internally themselves. They've got a new general manager and president, Don Waddell, there, and you know they're trying to, you know, they're wanting a fresh start. I think too, a new coat of paint on the walls as well. So I think this is a trade that will get done. It just the timeline is a little bit murky just because of some of the unique circumstances at play.
Okay, let's move on to Jacob Markstrom.
Well, I think, Jacob Markstrom, we saw in the season, right? He had, I assume you were in that scrum. I can't remember if you were for sure, but,
Yes.
he had
Yes.
a pretty pointed comment that he didn't appreciate the way everything played out sort of publicly, at the trade deadline in terms of so much discussion about him and then him not being moved. Fast forward now, his name's still pretty strongly circulated in the rumor mill, but it feels as though the trade talks are at a bit of a standstill in that, Calgary's obviously not just going to trade him to trade him. That's not a good way of doing business. That's not a good way to manage your assets. I think New Jersey feels it's at a point where it's put its best foot forward in the discussions. The Devils certainly are a team that continue to have interest in trying to get Jacob Markstrom. I believe he still has interest in waiving his no movement clause to go play there if they can consummate that deal. And then here, Jacob Markstrom is sort of twisting in the wind. And I think that naturally that's not a comfortable place to be. And so, I think that this deal, when I talk about timelines, I think this deal needs to be expedited to some degree. I mean, I don't mean tomorrow, but as we get through the draft window and where a lot of trades tend to happen, I think that Markstrom, as you would expect, wants some clarity on his future sooner rather than later. I mean, he's looking at the possibility of a move and has to look after his family and everything there. So, I think that there's maybe like a small hint of frustration, maybe that it's not happening yesterday, but to that, I would also point out, I mean, it's not as though there's a bunch of trades happening right now and the Flames have forgotten about Jacob Markstrom. It's just not the window quite yet where you see a lot of trade activity. But it's safe to say, I think he's at the stage where if this is going to happen, he'd like to know sooner than later so that he can make the necessary plans and move on.
If this somehow gets delayed past the draft with Jacob Markstrom's future, I think the Calgary Flames are missing out on a massive window of opportunity. You could make the argument they've already done so with the fact that Jacob Markstrom is still a member of the Flames, that he wasn't traded at the deadline, at least with what's been reported with what could have potentially been in a return with New Jersey from the deadline. And then you look at this point in the offseason where people are wondering if the 10th overall pick from the Devils is in play. I mean, those are two big windows for Craig Conroy and the Calgary Flames to try to make a deal work with the New Jersey Devils, if that happens to be that team with some of the assets available to them. If we're at a point where we're in July and the draft has already passed and Jacob Markstrom's still a member of the Calgary Flames, like, this is a situation I wonder, like, right now there's like a small hint of frustration. Could it not just, it probably could got to boil over once it gets to July, and that could have a massive domino effect too, because remember, Jacob Markstrom's there. You're wondering about Dan Vladar. You still have Dustin Wolf waiting in the wings to see if he can get some more time too. Like, I think this is a little bit more than just wondering about Jacob Markstrom and his future. Like, I think if this gets to a point where he's still on the team in July, like after the draft, I wonder about what other dominoes can fall and what other, how else that frustration kind of spreads itself. That's just my wondering and feeling about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to guess it could end up there. It's just we're not there yet, right? Like, they haven't let the draft pass and not traded him. I'm not certain the Devils would trade the number 10 pick for him. But we'll see. Like, remember, there's an element of bluffing and negotiations and drawing things out and trying to apply pressure on the other side to this. So I'm not going to in advance criticize them for the return, because I think we can definitely agree if the Flames just make an outright horrible trade, that doesn't help them in any way either. And the bigger issue too is, quite honestly, goaltenders don't tend to bring back a whole lot in trades. I mean, for whatever reason, a great goaltender could be the difference between winning or losing. The freaking thing behind me here that the Stanley Cup. Do you see Mark Stone over my shoulder and hitting this banner? Mm-hmm. But because their goaltending performances can be unpredictable, and for whatever reason, there's lots of goalies available at all times. They're not all great. And Jacob Markstrom at his best, I think we would agree, is a great goaltender. They just don't bring a whole lot back. So it's not a comfortable or easy situation for the Flames. And they still reasonably do have a couple weeks to see it to a resolution that I think everyone can live with.
All right, we'll see about that. Marty Necas.
It sounds like there's maybe 5 or 6 teams that are pretty interested still in trading for him, and it's a big spot. Eric Tulsky's interim GM of the Hurricanes. He's obviously had a huge hand in running that organization going back years now, but now he's in the main chair, we would call it, on these trade discussions. And it's Natchez has a lot of talent, obviously, but he did not have a great season last year. Has not maybe got to the point where he's producing at a level a lot of people think he should with his skill. He's made it known that he'd welcome a trade out of Carolina. I don't think he was happy with the way he's been used and deployed there by the team. It feels like this is a natural breaking point, but the Hurricanes have held firm to wanting a player back that they can put right into their lineup to replace him. That this isn't a cap related move at this time. It's not about trying to turn over the team and get younger. I mean, it's really about I think a player and a team that don't have a seamless fit at this point in time. And so, I think a lot of interest there, but I don't think anything's accelerated to the point where, it's high level discussions. They're really down to brass tacks. And so, I'm sure the Hurricanes will keep working the phones on that one and see if they can get something done.
It's out there that the Carolina Hurricanes in a trade for Marty Natchez, they would probably want an established player back as opposed to just a package with futures. As we start to figure out, or at least try to figure out which teams might be involved, or at least we know the number of how many teams might still be in on Marty. Does that change the asking price at all? Has that changed?
No, I don't think it has. I think, they're holding firm to that. And so what you're talking about is a kind of a hockey deal, right? You're looking to, maybe there's a similar player. I mean, look, we can point to Nikolai Ehlers in Winnipeg where the Jets are now listing on him. Like, could that be a fit? I'm not certain it is or it isn't, but like you start to look at those kind of scenarios where, two teams are both incentivized and neither of those guys is a problem. So I don't want to frame it as that, but you have maybe a potential looming problem or some uncertainty. In the case of Ehlers, he's 1 year out from being a free agent and he's in line to get a pretty healthy raise. And so can Winnipeg make that work while also needing to sign Kyle Connor? And in Natchez' case, he's a restricted free agent this summer. He's got 2 years of RFA status left, but he to sign him long term is going to be a major commitment. And so perhaps you end up with a fit like that. And I don't want to make it sound like it has to be a Winnipeg Carolina fit, but I think that's kind of the sort of deals that you're looking at potentially here for Natchez. And so, there are players around the league. I mean, those aren't the only two that are, posing some challenges for their teams and that are, closer to gaining their full rights under the CBA. And so let's see if we can find a match somewhere there.
Natchez for Ehlers. I wonder, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't throw that in the universe. Do you have anything else on Nikolai Ehlers?
Not really. I mean, I don't think the Jets feel they have to move him or anything like that. It's just, as they're looking forward, I mean, it's just they have a decision to make. They have, the cap comes for everybody, not just the teams that win the cup, but even the ones that have, been good teams but haven't, quite gotten to that level. And I think the Jets are at a position where it's going to be tough to pay him and pay Kyle Connor, and they have to look ahead to what they have in their system, and so I think that they're open to exploring the Ehlers market to see what that could do for them and what it might free up.
I don't know if we've mentioned this person at all. I don't know if you even know who this person is, but Mitch Marner, does that name ring a bell at all?
It does, and I don't even know where we're at in the public discourse with Mitch Marner. There's been so much discussion about him, so I've lost track of what's been reported. Here's what I will report. Here's what I know to be true about the situation. The Leafs are not leaning on Mitch Marner right now. They have not decided 100% they have to trade him, and they're going to make life uncomfortable, and they're getting the list of names. It's none of that's what's going on. I mean, the fact that remains true with Mitch Marner is he controls the hammer here. And so if there's a trade, the Leafs need to work with him. They need to, as quietly as possible, try to line up, the teams or a team where they could live with the return. And then they have to go to Mitch Marner and his agent, Darren Ferris, and see if there's a deal to be made. Would Mitch negotiate with that team? Would Mitch consider playing there? Would that team trade for him as just a player with 1 year left on his deal? Does there have to be an extension? I mean, obviously, it would be a massive trade, whatever it is, if it happens, and it's a slightly complex situation. So, where things are at right now, as far as I know, is it's a little bit. I mean, it's not quiet around Mitch Marner. There's so much speculation. I think there's some frustration just about all the public discourse about it. And look, that's the nature of the beast when you're that player and when the possibilities are on the table that we're talking about. But, at this point in time, I don't think the Leafs have a deal for him, and I don't think they've gone to him and asked him for a list or anything like that. I think they have to. It does not make any sense for the Leafs to go to war with this player to make this any more public than it already is. And so I think that they're going to quietly behind the scenes see, engage if there's a trade market. If there is, then they take it to the next step and see if Mitch Marner is willing to consider that move.
How surprised would you be? And you can reserve the right to change your mind at any point with this answer. How surprised would you be if Mitch Marner began next season with the Toronto Maple Leafs?
I'd say I wouldn't be that surprised because, it seems as though he's comfortable playing out his free agent year. I mean, the only reason I would think it would have to happen is if he was in a spot where he needed an extension this summer, like he didn't feel comfortable going into that final season and playing. There's career risk if you do that, right? If you have a significant injury, it could impact your future earnings, things like that. I mean, generally, NHL players opt for as much security as possible because the nature of the sport they play. But the fact that Mitch Marner is willing to play this right out till next summer and potentially chase free agency then, I think that makes it very possible he remains a member of the Maple Leafs. It's way too soon to declare that's going to happen. I'm certainly not doing so. But, I think that they and he both have to live with the fact that, it's going to be hard to line up something that satisfies everyone here, that is a team or city Mitch is comfortable with, is a trade return that makes the Leafs go, do you know what? While still in a cup window, we're willing to pull the trigger on this deal. And, at the end of the day, Mitch himself seems rather inclined to just remain a Maple Leaf. So I think everyone should race for the possibility, the real possibility he's back with that team next season.
Okay. Let's go through some quick news and notes here. Any thoughts on Doug Armstrong's successor in St. Louis, Alex Steen, set to replace him in 2026?
My biggest thought is it's just really unique the way they've decided to do this by announcing it publicly, by detailing the succession plan, by saying starting in 2026, this guy who in these next 2 years are going to take on an more important role in our organization is ultimately going to take over the hockey decision making. And so, I knew that Alex Steen, since his playing career, has been really well thought of. A very, very smart guy. So I'm not saying I could have predicted this for him when he was a player, but knowing him a little bit when he was playing in the league, I'm not surprised to hear that his career would go in this direction is probably the best way to frame it. And, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. And I do think it makes sense. I mean, remember even before Barry Trotz took over as the GM in Nashville, I mean, he had a period of 6 months, call it, or whatever it ended up being, where he worked with David Poile. They announced ahead of time, David Poile is going to run this team through the draft. He's going to handle the last trade deadline and then basically turn the keys over to Barry. But Barry was there in the room, part of those decisions, just not the one making them. This is a longer window than that. And obviously, I think it's probably a bigger learning curve for Alex Steen just because he's younger than Trotz was. Obviously he's seen everything as a player. He had a long career, successful career. But, it's a little different when you're talking to the other GMs and out there scouting and all those types of things. But really interesting that they're going to groom him for that role and a little more European flavor, too. He'd be the second Swedish GM after Patrick Allvin in Vancouver, which is another little wrinkle to it. But I think it's maybe this will be a trend. I don't know how that's going to go, if this is just a total one-off, unique circumstances. But I do think it makes a lot of sense to do what they're doing and to kind of declare it publicly. It removes any questions, right? Everyone knows what's going on.
Okay. One more for you. The Utah Hockey Club jerseys. And where are we at with a new name?
Well, they're going to play as the Utah Hockey Club next season while going through the name process. I think that's my understanding. Is that right?
Yes, something like that.
Yeah, that was my understanding. And then obviously, it's sort of like we saw with the PWHL teams. It's not just as simple as making a name and designing a logo and having everything ready to go to market. There's a period of time where these things have to take shape, and so that's what they're going to do in Utah. I've been on Utah HC all along. So if they just start with that name and stay there, I'm okay with it. But they're doing fan balloting. They're down to the final 6 names. And that's basically where I'm at.
Yeah. Utah HC. We're both stands of that name, by the way.
I know. I've taken a lot of heat for that publicly. Like, my goodness.
You shouldn't.
And did I see that? Did everyone hate that jersey? I'm like, what's wrong with those jerseys they unveiled?
The jerseys are fine. They're like black and light blue. Like, what's wrong with them? They're fine.
And it's also, I think it's everyone's understanding. This is just the starting point of like, I don't know.
I think we live in a world where people like to be irrationally angry about whatever. Just, that's what I think. I don't think there's anything wrong with the jerseys or the name.
Producer Drew's in the big seat today, and he says he doesn't like the diagonal writing across the sweater. So,
okay. Well, I think you'd have like producer Drew. If you came up with a list of things that he actually liked, it might not be that long of a list.
Be a short list. Hopefully, we'd be on that list, but I'm not even sure about that.
I don't even know if I'd be on that list, to be honest with you. Oh man. Do you have a stick tap for this week?
I'm gonna stick tap to fans of Edmonton, man. I gotta say, it was pretty cool being here for that game, and I'm not rooting for any outcomes in the series, but I do feel bad because so many people after the game are stopping me, and they're so down seeing their team go down 3-0. But the Canadian Cup thing is just I find it mystifying how long it's been. But I mean, these fans in all the Canadian cities, I'm not saying it was just I just happened to be at Edmonton and had that experience, but still remain so loyal to the team and so badly want to see them win it. So that was I've been to a lot of Stanley Cup final games. I'm a pretty lucky guy, but that was one of the more memorable scenes, experiences, nights. I mean, the game itself wasn't necessarily the greatest thing ever, although, when Edmonton, there was definitely some tension there when Edmonton pushed back in the third period and got it to 4-3. But I'm just going to stick tap all the people that are out here in the middle of June, 10,000 people in the streets, 20,000 in the stands, many more glued to their TVs. It was a pretty cool game 3 here.
I'm trying to remember. Is it your 18th Stanley Cup final that you're covering?
It is, yeah. A lot.
I just want to make sure. Yeah, there are some people who have never had that experience. You're very lucky.
Anyway. My teammate Daniel Nugent-Bowman going through it for the first time here in Edmonton. So that's cool too. I love seeing that.
Him, Avery Lewis McDougall, a whole bunch of people going through this for the very first time. Shout out to the media. That's actually where I'm going to go with my stick tap. Just everyone who's been able to travel back and forth between this insanely ridiculous travel stretch between these two cities. Full marks to you guys for being able to do your jobs as best as you can. I know there's some people who unfortunately have not been able to make the trek because of some weather stuff and all that, but we all appreciate in the hockey world what you guys have been able to do in terms of your coverage throughout the Stanley Cup Finals. So you get a piece of the stick tap, but this is really for everyone covering the series.
Well, I can confirm these two cities are far apart. That is definitely true after the travel day between game 2 and 3.
CJ8. CJ8. Dude. Great work as always. Be sure to check out CJ's work on The Athletic. He's been covering the Stanley Cup Final and everything else in the NHL world as well as he does. He's amazing. Get your questions in now for Ask CJ. We'll get to them on our next episode, whether on X/Twitter or on Discord, if you're able to send in questions there. Again, we'll get to as many as we can, and subscribe to the podcast, whether you're listening on audio or on YouTube. We'll be back next week. We'll be back on Monday, or I'm trying to remember when the next game of the series is, but we're trying to kind of have these episodes after the games and not have them before the games. So
yeah, we'll be back Monday, because if there's a game 5, it is on Tuesday. So
all right, so we'll be back on Monday with a brand new episode of the CJ Show. Bye, guys.
The Chris Johnston Show. Inside the game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.